Like, let me just say about this book, first of all. For most of us, there's nothing new in this book. We've been working on this stuff for a very long time. In fact, this book is quite tame for most of us. We've moved on beyond some of this. The reason that I thought it was important for us to do this is because we are going out into the big bad world to invite people in, and we want to be able to talk in an intelligent way about some of the transitions that we've been through in our own theology. And I think Brian McLaren does a really wonderful job of synthesizing some of the work that we have been doing. So, how many have read the book? So almost through, just getting started. Okay, so what I would suggest is that if you have particular questions, the best way to do this, instead of me sending around a question sheet and you have to try and think of it now, send me an email. And those questions will definitely become part of our conversation. Because I think it's more important for us to talk about the stuff that's percolating in us at this point. In terms of our theology, I think most of us have been through some transitions. We've been through the deconstruction phase, and some of us are in the reconstruction phase. And so that's where I would like to base the emphasis. We're not going to closely follow the program. The program's good, but it's geared, as my very first pastor used to say, at the lowest common denominator. And that's kind of the way they do things in the American church. My first pastor was an American. He said, you always have to aim at the grade 5 level, which I think is one of the reasons why most of us went screaming out the front door, because we're not in grade 5 anymore, and that stuff doesn't work for us. So this is a cut above that, but it's still fairly basic. So we're not going to stick to that program, but it is going to provide a bit of a framework. So without any further,
Pastor.
Yes.
For your comfort, just for the temperature is set. The heat went on at 19. The heat will not go on at all the rest of the morning because it's already beyond 19.
Excellent.
So the furnace won't go
Thank
on at
you.
all. No, it's just.
I just have to adjust my own thermostat then. All right. So what I want to look at is where I hope to go with this. So today will be a bit of an introduction, a little bit more of an introduction, and then next week we're gonna look at let's just put these all out here. The migration. He's set this up in 3 sections. And so there's the spiritual migration, and then there's the migration from the violent image of God to the loving image of God, and then there's the migration from an organized religion to an organizing religion. So we're gonna chop it up into those chunks, and our questions, concerns, inspirations, hopes, dreams, visions will go all through all of the sessions. But this morning is mostly an introduction, partly because it gives me an idea of what's working in this material in the book inside you, what's percolating in you, and it'll help with the questions. So I want to begin with this notion of migration, and it's an interesting metaphor that he's using throughout the book, and so I just want to play with it a little bit. We have the biblical migrations, and those migrations that most of us are used to reading about in terms of the Hebrew Scriptures tend to have a great deal of imagery around a violent God. My favorite one that doesn't do that is the story of Ruth, and sort of the migrations in and out of Moab. So this sense of being on the move is something that I think it works as a really good metaphor for a spiritual migration. Particularly when I think in terms of the New Testament stuff, with Jesus coming out of the countryside to teach, leaving his hometown to teach, and the various different migrations that happen there. And then, of course, the sort of famous ones of Paul's migrations. But more importantly, And the reason that I think that this work is vital is the migration of Christianity as a religion. I agree with Brian McLaren wholeheartedly that Christianity, like Islam, like Judaism, has been militarized. It's been hijacked and militarized. And that's why this work is so vital. And so you only have to look at the doctrine of discovery and the entire history of the colonization and the very word civilization, which from my perspective, when I was learning history, the word civilization was about conversion. I'm British, so the British Empire civilized the world, and what that means is we baptized them. The doctrine of discovery, all you have to do is ask our Indigenous sisters and brothers, and you know what's going on there. We've done some work on the doctrine of discovery. The interesting thing is that our church only repudiated it this year. I think the Anglicans this year as well, and Roman Catholics have repudiated it. But it's 2018, and the doctrine of discovery is still a noose around our necks. So I think it's really important for us to do this work, if for no other reason than to engage the hijackers of Christianity. And in some ways, those hijackers live in us, right? So it's not always external. We have also hijacked. I mean, there's nothing better than having an other to play off of in the way in which most of us have been indoctrinated. You know, in some ways, even the sort of education system trains us to find another to play off of. So I think that we need to do a lot of this work internally. So I thought we'd begin by talking about our own personal migrations. And for me, the word migration is kind of like embedded in my bones. And I tried to count the migrations and I limited it to those migrations over 4,000 kilometers. And so migrating, I didn't include the one from England to Ireland, but there's 8 of them in my life. And I can honestly say that they were horrendous. There was the hope and the excitement of going to a new place, but there was also homesickness, feeling dislocated and not knowing where I was or what was expected of me or where the ground was. You know, something as simple as not knowing where the post office is or where to go buy milk or gas. And so I was wondering how many of you have experienced, like, we're Canadians, and Marg, you've done the migration.
I migrated quite a distance.
Yes, yeah. And you were quite young too.
Oh, yeah.
And how was that? Like, what is?
Well, the first one from Poland to Germany, I don't really remember a lot. I was only about two and a half, I think. And then the one from Germany to Canada. Oh, that was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my childish image, it was as though money and candy grew on trees in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of the way I thought.
Yeah. We thought that there was going to be candy, but it would be buried in all the snow. I have that memory of. Anyone else done a?
Well, I was born in Wales, and I came to Canada from England when I was 4. And we came by boat, and my parents' original plan was to live in Canada for a few years and then go off to Australia. Of course, there was never enough money to do that. But I do remember, I was just thinking, by the time I finished high school, I'd gone to 8 different schools. By the time I got married, I think we had moved 12 or 13 times. I think that was not that different from you. You moved a lot too. But the worst I remember was, even though I was British and from the Commonwealth, when I was 5, living in Belleville, these kids picking on me and calling me a DP and a limey and being really nasty. So even though I was just a white Commonwealth member, I'll never forget that feeling of how they were. So yeah, always.
I still remember the DP label.
Yeah.
And you know, I never experienced that at all. And we were Germans into Canada right after the war. And I don't remember anybody calling us DP. And there were probably 4 of us, 5 of us new in the school.
Yeah.
And we just had to pick up. There was nobody translating.
What
or
decade?
anything.
So the late 40s? Early
48.
48. So migration through the 50s and the 60s was quite dramatic in terms of the shift in Canada, and so we're experiencing a little bit of that now. You know, we were all welcoming refugees a couple years ago, and now that they're here and more of them are coming, we're starting to hear the backlash. And I think that may be what I was in the 60s.
I came over in 52.
Yeah, I came in the 60s, and DP was very much thrown about in the school system. Neil.
This is quite different. It's just one move. When Mark and I were married, well, I grew up in Cayuga, farming territory, whatever, down near Lake Erie. We went to Santa Cruz, California, and after a few months there, I was officially charged with being a communist. So that was quite a shift.
Yeah, they had you pegged.
And 20 years later, I found out who it was when we went back to California. Wow. It was the person that had the GM dealership, and I knew him well. He and his wife had gone to a evangelistic conference.
12-step thing. Was it the 12-step thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But when they came back, and I was teaching a course supposedly on world religions, and so he officially lobbied to San Francisco that I was a communist. I said, whoa, this was a shift.
Yeah.
You were pinpointed at that time in the 50s?
Oh, well, no, I never really. Yeah, but it was just,
Yeah.
The other thing that comes to me with word migration, my grandparents came, so didn't hear much. But all those nature TV shows where you have these hordes on the Serengeti moving thousands of kilometers to find sustenance. It's critical, they're going to die unless they go. And so the sense of leaving because you have to.
Yeah.
And that there's you need to live.
Yeah.
And so it's a different.
In my case, we were economic refugees. We were coming looking for a better life, but we had a choice. That choice didn't look as good as the Troubles geared up in Belfast, but we still had a choice. Anyone else? Pat?
Well, I migrated from the States to here, as you know, in the 60s, and it was wonderful, but I had the fear of leaving home. I was homesick and that kind of thing. But I never encountered any difficulties until later on here, different pockets in the church. But
And that's our course. In the church.
Yes.
In the church.
But for the most part, people were curious to know where you came from, but they were welcoming for the most part. So it helped get over the homesickness and loneliness and no family and that kind of thing.
So, if you could you go back to that homesickness and that loneliness and just sort of feel that for a moment? I mean, I said to a friend of mine who was trying to encourage me to move to California, where life is a lot different than it is here. This was a few years back, not now, because now he wants to come up here for obvious reasons. But he was trying to convince me to go down there, and I said to him, I don't think I have another big move in me, because it's years of that ache, you know, that horrible ache. So the reason that I wanted to sort of talk about those feelings is because this whole thing about deconstructing this Christianity that has been given to us from our ancestors, handed down to us, and also that's out there in the culture. For me, there's a bit of an edge to it. It's like, you know, I miss certain elements of it. I'm not sure of where I am. I don't know where the ground always is. I mean, I'm a professional, so it's a little different for me because I was promised that if I learned this piece of information, like if I learned this theology, this body of knowledge, all would be well. And then so also I was a woman, so I was also cautioned, you have to learn it better than the men know it if you want to have a career. So I really worked hard at learning the traditional, the best of Lutheran theology, right? The wonderful doctrine of grace, all of the stuff that attracted me to the Lutheran Church in the first place, and then all of the stuff that compelled me to do this as my life's work. And then suddenly I find myself in a place where the body of knowledge on the planet is changing at such a rapid rate, and my access to that knowledge is, magnified. And the things I thought were true are not true anymore, and life is changing, and the church is still handing me this body of knowledge, and it doesn't work and it doesn't fit. And so for a while, I would compartmentalize stuff and put some stuff over here and some stuff over there, and I could deal with science and creation because, oh yeah, I mean, sure, it's not 7 days, but those are metaphorical days, and I still had the Creator doing this and the Creator doing that, but I never really looked at what it meant in terms of what it means to be human and the whole fall from grace stuff. And so that started to fall apart, and this started to fall apart. Resurrection became questionable. Life after death, suddenly I'm not finding that in the body of knowledge in the way that I thought it was there. And so all of these things are being pulled away, and it's like migrating to a strange, I see people nodding their heads, like suddenly we're like, wait a minute, and I've told some of you this before, a couple of years ago when they called me up and said, your mom's dying, get out here. I'm on the airplane crying, not for my mom, and not really for me, but I'm crying because the sky god is gone, and I don't know who to pray to. What does that mean anymore? So I see people nodding their heads. Have you been there? Do you know that territory? And so this whole notion of migration then becomes, do I really want to go there? And once I'm there, and I've migrated to this new place, you have to start building a life for yourself. And what do you keep from the old life? I remember when the old steamer trunk arrived, that doll that I waited for 6 months for suddenly didn't look so nice. It was like, oh, why was I pining for that doll? I was young, and I decided I was too old for dolls. But for 6 months I was like, when are the steamer trunks coming? And I opened it up and there was a doll in it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what I packed. That's what was important to me 6 months ago. So how do we the stage of reconstruction is difficult because we're also grieving the loss of something, a way of being that we thought was permanent. And so how do we migrate into this new space? And how do we also recognize that some folks don't feel the need to migrate? Or some folks are terrified of migrating, and so they're going to build a wall. And the kind of, trade in the DP stuff for being called out. There's a price to pay for this reconstruction, right? Some people have left. How many of you don't bring people to this church? Yeah, right?
Not like I'd like to.
Right? Do you want to say why you wouldn't bring someone to this church? No, seriously, I think it's important. Like, if we're going to have a conversation, it's just us, folks. Like, why don't you bring people here? I get it, right? It's not a judgment, Mark.
I'll just say that I felt for a long time, if I brought my sister here, she would walk out furious.
Yeah.
And that would break our relationship, probably.
Yeah.
And that's why I wouldn't bring her.
Yeah.
Even at Christmas, we haven't.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, Mark, 4 or 5 were friends from Concordia Teachers College, Missouri Synod. We finally got together a couple of years ago. In Leaside, they came up to honor Mark's birthday sort of thing, and they said, let's go up to church up here. Mark did everything to keep them away.
We don't have to go to church today.
When we were down there, we were stocking it up, and the first two there, delightful, they were talking about Trump, and they hated Trump, and okay. It's gonna be
No, Obama, they.
Obama,
Oh,
sorry,
they-
sorry, Obama.
Yeah.
So we realized this was tough sledding.
Yeah.
Well, you know the story of those nice, lovely American Lutherans, the lovely American Lutherans who came up here from the States. They were here on a 3-year contract. Really nice family, 3 boys, all
Yes.
in confirmation.
Yeah.
And when the Gore Bush thing happened, and my first, I think we were drinking something. We were drowning our sorrows. And the very next day I got a call from this lovely, nice American woman that some of you know, and she was beside herself on the phone, and can you come over? I just don't know what to do. And I was like, I was going over to continue our conversation from the night before, and I get there and she said, these Democrats are gonna ruin the country. And I'm like, oh shit. You know, now what? Like, so I sat down and
Consoled her.
yeah, it was one of the toughest pastoral call pieces I've done. And at the end of it, I said to her, I said, you know, we're both feeling similar things. I'm not an American, but I'm a citizen of the planet, so I have a vested interest in this. We're both feeling similar things, and you need to know, she'd only been here a few months, you need to know that I'm upset in the same way that you're upset, but I'm grieving because I think they're going to let your candidate in. And she went completely pale. And to her credit, we maintained that relationship. But it was hard work on both our parts. And I would warn her when something was coming up. And sometimes her husband wasn't here every Sunday because he was traveling with work, and sometimes she would keep him at home. And the boys were all Democrats, so that was okay. But it was a tough slog. Like, it's not just, like, migration isn't about distance or sometimes it's about going into someone else's space. I mean, I have family members who, the last conversation I remember was with my brother about the gun registry, the long gun thing when they were taking it away. He's my brother, and so we're used to fighting. But it terrified Carol. Like, I looked over at her and all the color was gone in her face. She thought we were going to come to blows. And I was like, don't worry, it's just us. Like, we'll fix this. But it's hard. Like, this migrating over to some other tribe, some other group of people is difficult. I saw your post yesterday, Edward, about the young man you work with. And it was like, yeah, like, we can all resonate with, you know, how far can you go in the conversation? You've talked about members of your family, Gary. How do we do this? But I still think that Brian McLaren is right when he says we need to engage in this work, even in those really difficult places, because Christianity, like Islam, like Judaism, and like various other large religions, has been weaponized. And it will be the death of all of us if there aren't some folks who are willing to engage in some of this difficult work. Okay. So I thought the best way to get us into the book was, this isn't part of the program, but this is, a friend sent this from Texas. Basically, for those of you who have gotten through the introduction, you will recognize this.
To read 2 little passages tonight from this book that I just wrote, and you'll catch on. Imagine that you just bought a 12-pack of Coke. Each virgin can sits before you, bubbling with a promise of caffeinated, carbonated, carbohydrate-rich pleasure. You remove the first can from the cardboard box and pop it open. You should see how I spelled that. You lift the can to your lips, but the liquid tastes salty and foul. Shocked, you throw it away and open the second can. You take a sip, and immediately spit it out. It tastes like spoiled milk. You open a third can and lift it cautiously to your lips, but don't drink. The smell of carbonated sewage disgusts you. If the fourth and fifth cans greet you with a scent of gasoline and vinegar, how likely is it that you'll open the 6th through 12th cans, each of which has the classic sweet, velvety, tongue-tingling taste you were expecting? Now imagine you call Coca-Cola customer service and share with them your experience. Customer service says, "Coca-Cola World Headquarters, how may I help you?" You say, "I just bought a 12-pack of Coke that tastes terrible." Customer service says, "I'm sorry to hear that. What color were the cans?" The cans were normal, bright red with white lettering. Customer service, "Well, that's the most important thing. Was the cardboard box sound, the box that contained the 12 cans?" "Yes, the cardboard box is fine. It was the taste that was the problem." "Thanks for calling. I'm glad the cans were red and the box was sturdy. Enjoy Coke and have a nice day." A brand like Coke only has meaning because it is linked to an essential quality or qualities for a soft drink. Taste, not the can. With a politician, policies, effectiveness, and character count, not hairstyle or skin color. With a bicycle, speed, weight, and comfort are paramount, not saddle color. And what are the qualities of Christian faith that really matter, regardless of packaging? Therein lies the trouble. For centuries, Christian faith has been presented as a system of beliefs. The system of beliefs has supported a wide range of unintended consequences, from colonialism to environmental destruction, subordination of women, to stigmatization of LGBT people, anti-Semitism to Islamophobia, clergy pedophilia to white privilege. What would it mean for Christians to rediscover their faith, not as a problematic system of beliefs, but as a just and generous way of life, rooted in contemplation and expressed in action and compassion, that makes amends for its mistakes and is dedicated to beloved community for all? Could Christians migrate from defining their faith as a system of beliefs to expressing it as a loving way of life? Could Christian faith lose the bitter taste of colonialism, exclusion, judgment, hypocrisy, and oppression, and regain the sweet and nourishing flavor of justice, joy, and peace? So I know a little bit about the story of this beautiful congregation, and I got to be here a couple of years ago and be honored as one of the heroes of hope here, which meant so much to me. And whenever anybody asks me about this church, I always say the same thing. I say, I go to a lot of churches, and my time with Cathedral of Hope stands out as one of the most precious worship experiences of my life. Not only because the music was unbelievable and all the, but it was the love that I felt from the people here. What I felt, and I had so many people share just a snippet of their story with me, what I felt here was that so many people had been hurt by religion and religious people. They had tasted some pretty sour stuff. But instead of making them bitter, it made them better. And they decided to not put up with that, but to find something deeper and richer. They went for the real taste of what I think Jesus was about, which was the flavor of love. So when I wrote this book, I wanted to try to explore what I think is happening in the Christian faith. It's happening here in the United States, but I've had the chance, I've been in about only maybe 40, 45 countries, something like that, but I've been in a lot of places around the world, and I've seen this happening in so many different places in different ways, where people are saying, we focused on the can, we focused on the packaging, we focused on the box, and we've not paid enough attention to the contents, to what really it's supposed to be about. So what is the real contents? What is this thing really supposed to be about? A Pharisee came to Jesus and said, "Good teacher, what is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus said to him, "Thou shalt have the correct beliefs. And the second is like it, thou shalt join a denomination that upholds those correct beliefs." Not the gospel. You understand what Jesus said is absolutely stunning. He said the great commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But here's the real kicker. And the second is like it, which means the second is equal to it. The second is equal in importance. Do you understand what a stunning thing that is to say? You shall love the Lord your God. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. What is the essence? What is the core? Jesus didn't say, hey, listen, I've come to introduce some new beliefs, get rid of the old beliefs, we'll start a new religion and name it after me. It's not what he said. He said, He said, look, I'm here, come follow me. I'm here to teach you a new way of life. Not a system of beliefs, a way of life, and this is a way of life centered in love. I grew up in very strict churches that were very... I know a little bit about the story of this beautiful congregation, and I got to be here a couple of
Stop
years
that
ago.
there. So, the word branding has been bandied about here for a while, and I want to talk about something that I think many of us have experienced in our life in the church as the church has been shrinking, and we have all been through church programs designed to present the church in a whole new way, right? I mean, this has been going on most of my experience in the church from the 70s, 80s, 90s into this millennium. I mean, we're trying to repackage, always trying to repackage the church. And I think it will continue to fail. It doesn't matter what we do, because the stuff inside the package is rotten. Now, don't get me wrong, that stuff inside the package is not one single thing, right? It's a package that contains a whole bunch of stuff. There are pearls in there, right? Pearls, treasures, beautiful stuff in there. The problem is we can't get past the stench of what is rotten in Christian theology. And the institution is woefully unprepared to deal with that stench and to deal with what is rotten, to cut away the stuff that has no business being in the package at all. And part of that is because of fear, right? We're afraid that if we pull this piece out, that other piece will then come into question. And that's absolutely true, right? The moment you say that you're not going to take the scriptures literally, you have to then say, what about the interpretations that have been handed down to us from people who took the scriptures literally? And for those of us who are Lutheran, that means Martin Luther, right? Now you can go back before Martin Luther where people did not take the scriptures literally. Right? We have evidence of that. In fact, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th theologians followed mostly Origen's 4 levels of scripture, right? There's the surface meaning, and go below. We've talked about this before, and we can go into this next week a little bit. But this phenomenon of taking the church literally, taking the scriptures literally. And so Lutherans and Anglicans and Roman Catholics move towards a more words inspired by God, right? And so there's this wonderful picture of, God sort of beaming it down into the writers, and it comes out their hands, right? The era of historical criticism, where we discovered again, anew, for some of us it was new, for some folks it was again, where we discovered how the Bible came to be. And we're going to get a huge example of that this morning during worship. How the Bible came to be. Know that simply doing that little diagram where we teach children, I can find current confirmation program. The diagrams are updated. But I'm supposed to, according to this program, teach our young people that it kind of got beamed into the writers. It was inspired by God. What does that mean? Right? Now, I'm enough of a poet to believe in muses and how the Spirit works and mystery and all of that kind of thing. But once we say it's inspired Word of God, we can't touch it. Right? And we don't touch the interpretations that have come down to us from folks who believe that you can't touch it. And so when we say, let's stick with an easy example, the story of Adam and Eve and that damn apple, right? Okay, it was a pear. In Hebrew, it's a pear. But stick with that story for a moment. When we say that there are other ways to interpret the story that don't involve humanity falling from grace, because let's face it, that story was just humans being humans. And if you stay within the context of the story, who made them that way? The Creator, right? They were doing what humans do. Anyone who's ever dealt with a 2-year-old knows you do not put the best toy in the middle of the room and say, you can play with all the other toys, but that one, the one that caught your eye, you must never touch it. You know where the kid is going, right? And if you're going to say that the Creator of all that is dumber than you, is a stupid parent, like, how can you wander around in that story? So fine, we've established that story is not about a fall from grace. Well, then those folks who said, well, if you pull that piece out, this other piece over here is in trouble. And what happens? Suddenly the doctrine of grace is in trouble. So I'm a Lutheran, right? Doctrine of grace can get me all hot and bothered. I love that one. It's the most beautiful doctrine that the Lutheran tradition has ever gifted the church with. It's not entirely Lutheran. It's in Roman Catholicism. It's also in Judaism. But when you're raised Lutheran, you think it's ours, right? And it's a pearl. It's still. So, what's the doctrine of grace? Let's do this piece. It is not a trick question. What's the doctrine of grace? Anybody? Okay.
You say that when push comes to shove and there's disagreement, grace trumps. Clearly.
Lost the ability to use that word ever again. Yeah. It'll be 50 years before we can use that word again. It is kind of like that, but it's about the character of God, right? And what it says is, you have no merit of your own. And that you are not forgiven because of your merit, nor can you ever earn any merit that makes you worthy of being forgiven. You are forgiven simply because it is the nature of God to forgive. God is gracious. God is willing to forgive. That whole doctrine needs humans to be worms. It's called worm theology in some circles. It needs you to be a fallen sinner. in bondage to sin and cannot free yourself. You need to be saved. And we got just the Savior for you, right? So it's like, I got the snake oil. The snake oil is Jesus, right? There's snakes in today's readings. That's why I'm into the snake oil. So if I'm not a worm, if I'm not a fallen person, and if God is love, like, why do I need the doctrine of grace? I mean, Bonhoeffer's going to argue with me. Bonhoeffer is a German theologian. During Hitler's time, he was with the part of the church that was speaking up against the Nazis. He went to jail. He was executed a few days before the end of the war. His letters from prison, we're going to read one of them this morning, He would argue with me because he thinks, he would argue that my vision of humanity is somewhat warped, because I think humans are good, right? I believe what it says in Genesis. God saw that it was good. I believe, Teilhard de Chardin, who insists that we are not just, now this is Meister Eckhart, not Chardin, we are not just made by God, we are made of God, which means I am divine, you are divine. Everything is in God, and God is in everything. So if I go there, grace just comes. Because all I have to do is look through that window at those trees to know that I am part of the oneness that is God. So suddenly, I don't need atonement. Because grace just is. I'm pretty sure Bonhoeffer would accuse me of cheap grace. I happen to think old Gracie, she's pretty loose. She gives it away for free, right? Forgive the sort of sexist comment there, but if it's not unearned, it isn't grace. If it doesn't just flow, it's not grace, right? And so the cost of within the Lutheran tradition, since Bonhoeffer, it has to be a costly grace, right? The cost of discipleship is always suffering. It's always suffering. Why wouldn't it be? He was writing in prison, and the Nazis were torturing him. Of course, suffering is going to be his salvation. We have to make suffering our salvation at that point. Edward?
But isn't that in a way also a dangerous proposition, because then if it just comes, then why do we bother? We don't have any responsibility.
It just is. It is, and it flows. And whether or not I'm in it, I have some determination, because I was created of God. And so I'm fully responsible. So the other piece of this is that I don't believe that we are fallen sinners, but I do believe that humanity is incomplete and that we are continuing to evolve. So I think evolution has more to teach us about the nature of evil than a story about a snake. So, and it's not just biological evolution. It's evolution as an individual, right? I'm a far more temperate person now than I was when I was 17. I have evolved into that, right? And so the crimes and the sins that I committed when I was 17 were the crimes and the sins of the average 17-year-old, right? And so there's a place for that in creation. And yes, it's dangerous. Absolutely. Because I can abuse that. I can do nothing. Yes, it's dangerous. But so is the old paradigm. It's dangerous too. Life is dangerous. Gary.
I was just, earlier when you were talking about just it's human nature and that you saw that it was good, I'm now, after having read the present book, we happen to have another one of McLaren's books in our library, A New Christianity.
Yeah.
I think it is. And I'm just starting into that. So he's starting to go through the narrative, and when you said, and you saw that it was good, I love Brian's way of saying, he didn't say that it was perfect.
No, that's
He
true.
saw that it was good.
Yeah.
And that just really, you know.
What is it? Somebody who knows Richard Rohr better than I do. He says something about I can't get it. I'll have it by next week for you. But it's about this difference between good and perfect. And so we're as Christian theologians, we're searching for the perfect, and we're not willing to explore the good. So we don't want to leave the old paradigm because it's the faith of our fathers and it got us here, and we don't want to leave it. We know it's not great, but this one you're talking about over here, it has problems too, and we can't see better or degrees of whatever.
Well, in that, I was just thinking that we also lose sight of, although we're evolving, each evolvement is still part of a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the initial
Yes.
cycle that we
Yeah.
done.
My favorite character in the Hebrew scriptures is Jacob, right? Israel. Like, the meaning of Israel is the one who wrestles with God, right? And so wrestling, not in the sense of sort of violent wrestling like I wrestled with my brother, right? To see who's right. That kind of wrestling. Like, we know at the end of it, we're going to brush ourselves off and walk away. We might be a little wounded by it. We might be changed by it. But this notion of wrestling with mystery, and I think for those of us who have been in the tradition for so long, we should take a sabbatical from the word God. It might be helpful in the way we communicate, because it doesn't matter. We've been indoctrinated in what that word means and the whole baggage that comes with it. I want to wrestle with the mystery, right? I mean, I think for me that's the fun of life, right? Is wrestling with mystery. And the minute I think I've got it pinned down, I know I'm in trouble, right? Because it's you're not the mystery. I just thought you were the mystery. I got to go over here. The mystery's over here.
Thinking back about it, I was thinking, should I get out of the way of evolution? Just because evolution's happening and maybe that's the best thing. But then I'm thinking maybe I need to can't wrestle with God, got to wrestle with evolution, and I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, and so can I just qualify the word a little bit? So there's the evolutionary theory of human biologically, right? And I mean that, yes, but I also mean this other evolution piece, right? Which isn't biological, although some people are starting to argue that it might be. So the evolution that's happening right now, right? We're moving ever so painfully from boys will be boys to damn it, no, they can't be. That's bullshit. This conversation, was it 36 years ago with Anita Hill, was a different conversation, right? Spanking. My mother spanked me, didn't do me any harm. Well, it did, but we won't go there. We don't even have this conversation much anymore. We've evolved in the way in which we think about things. I mean, evolution, for heaven's sakes, look at this. I mean, it's painful, right? So I mean evolution in that sense. I mean evolution in our ways of thinking and our ways of doing things. And evolution isn't in and of itself good, right? So it has its good points.
It's risky. Actually.
It's risky, it's dangerous, like what you were saying, I can just do nothing, right? I mean, I'm a relatively intelligent person, I have my health, I have some security financially. I could just sit on my Todd and do nothing. And what's the difference, right? What's the significance of that for the collective, right? Because my consumption of goods is still going to impact creation, right? It's having a detrimental effect. So I think what I'm saying is that where we once prescribed a system of beliefs and said, here's the system, learn it well, and practice it, and know if there's a problem, it's your problem, you're not the system's problem, right? Because you're practicing it wrong. And if you just do it better, like if you pray better, God will respond. Or, there's something wrong with you if it's not working. Instead of saying, whoa, let's wrestle with this mystery. What works for this community? Right? So I'm getting ahead of myself here, but McLaren talks about moving beyond being an organized religion to being an organizing religion and organizing for the common good. Right? And so that's the difference. And we are stuck with an organized religion that's now falling apart and building walls to defend itself. Questions?
Pastor, this is lighthearted, we need it now. This one person said that if I ever had a horse, I would name her Grace in case I fell for her.
Good Lutheran joke. I forgot to set the timer, so we've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm not going to do the second half of the class. This is good. So I'm just going to make some reminders here. This process that we're engaged in isn't for everybody, right? Clearly. And it is difficult, and it is painful, and it is ongoing. I happen to think it's healthy. I happen to think that those of us who have the stomach for it need to do it, simply because religion has been hijacked and weaponized. And we have problems to solve, and I think our religious instincts need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think in terms of creation, I think in terms of the huge chasm between wealthy and poor that is just
obscene,
scary, frightening. Mm-hmm. That piece, and I also think that the earth needs us, right? Like the planet needs us. This whole notion of, that's in the sermon, I won't go there. But this whole notion that we learned from our Hebrew ancestors, and we learned it in the first century. It has changed since the first century, thank God. So our Jewish sisters and brothers still don't have, not all of them, some of them do, because they're as much a victim of the atrophy of organized religion as we are. And Islam is as much a victim of that, as particularly in the patriarchal religions, this sort of atrophy that sets in. And all three of us have this. But this notion of being the chosen ones of God, there's nothing, it's a beautiful understanding if you understand that you are chosen to be a blessing to others. You're not chosen because you're special. You're not chosen because you're wonderful. You're not chosen because God wants to treat you better. You're chosen because God wants you to go and bless others. That's the Hebrew understanding of the chosen people. But Christianity has paraded around the planet in this sort of white privilege, colonizers, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, damn it, and there you go in the water and be happy, learn the system. And we have to get away from that. Because it's on, we're in this weird place. I was listening, it's really hard to get news that isn't American right now. So I listened to BBC and the German English thing, and I was listening to Al Jazeera yesterday. And there's an election going on in South America, and one of the candidates said from the podium to a woman candidate, don't worry, I won't rape you because you're not worthy of me.
Oh my gosh.
And this is the 21st century. Now, he's been charged, and somebody stabbed him after that, but it's a whole other thing. But what I'm saying is that's the extreme.
Yeah.
We're in a place right now where we're being polarized in incredible ways. And one of the things that we were trained as was, from the time we were babies, was this peacemaking piece. That's one of those jewels in the container that's got stuck in all the rot. And we have to, I actually own a string of pearls. And maybe we'll use those, because I think we need to figure out what the pearls are in our tradition, and there are many of them. And that's the gift that we have to offer this conversation.
And I think everybody's journey here has pearls. The things that have survived everything else, or emerged late in life, and you realize, oh my goodness, this is one of my treasures.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a difference.
Yeah.
And the way I see myself, the way I see the world, and others.
Yeah, and we've also got some rot that I mean, if we're willing to expose it, we can. I mean, I go, oh yeah, I had that. Yeah, I get that. I understand that. And I think I like what McLaren talks. I think it was McLaren. I've been reading several different people right now, but I'm pretty sure it was McLaren. He talked about, you can't learn to love people in isolation, right? You can only learn to love people in community. And so I think the church has no business surviving unless it's engaged in this kind of peacekeeping work, this kind of work for the planet, this kind of examination of our own rot. The thing is that we are in fertile ground right now, because I think we should give thanks that the church is in trouble. I think we should be grateful that the church can die in our lifetime, because it is providing the impetus for the organization to take a second look at itself and say, wait a minute, maybe we are rotten. And so communities like emerging communities, progressive communities, in all different kinds of denominations and in all different faiths, are starting to make sort of little networks together to talk about this stuff. In North America, in Europe, not so much in Africa yet, but it's coming. So we've actually gone over what I